nothing new compared to the previous regime. What is new is that a common legal basis on which many operators, many controllers have based their transfer of data from the EU to the US was doing so under the so-called the safe harbor regulatory framework. Now, as you will probably all be aware, this safe harbor framework was struck down, shall we say, by the Court of the European Union as seen as inadequate, and the EU Commission had overstepped its authority in that particular case. And so the safe harbor has been replaced by the new framework known as the Privacy Shield framework. Now this is really in relation to the GDPR, an adequacy decision where the European Commission has found the protection of personal data adequate insofar as the transfer to the US under this Privacy Shield framework. This framework is administered in the US by the Department of Commerce. There's a mirror framework for transfer of data from Switzerland to the US with a very similar details. It's a voluntary self-certification scheme. Quite a lot of organizations have latched on to formerly the safe harbor, now the Privacy Shield. But I mean, it's obvious from looking at the list that far from all of U.S. organizations that process data derived from the EU has utilized the safe harbor or Privacy Shield framework. It does require quite a lot of administration. I would invite you to go to the www.privacyshield.gov site to see the more detailed requirements of this. But of course, there are alternatives to using the Privacy Shield framework for transfer of data to the US from the EU. One such is commonly used is to utilize the standard data protection clauses that have been formulated by the EU Commission and published in the official journal, where companies can copy into these contractual clauses that will set down obligations on how this data is going to be processed and the rights of EU citizens safeguarded. And besides these contractual clauses, there is something known as binding corporate rules that have been carried over from the Personal Data Directive into the new GDPR. Now, these binding corporate rules is quite a chapter in itself, and it's quite an elaborate process on adopting these corporate rules, and they need the approval of have to be inspected and approved by a national data protection authority. And so only the biggest companies are typically interested in this. But it is a matter of some interest, and it could be that you are dealing with a company who has adopted binding corporate rules. So it's good to know that they exist. And finally, of course, there are other, what is known in the GDPR, as specific situations that will provide a legal basis for transfer of data to the United States. And one such, what under the headline of specific situation, is when the organization has the consent of the data subject involved. It's quite common for organizations who envisage transferring data to the U.S. is when they have the opportunity to collect the consent of the data subject to provide. And another well-known legal basis for the transfer, just as it is for processing data at all, will also cover the transfer is when the transfer is necessary for the performance of a contract with the data subject, and not just the contract itself, but the pre-contractual measures that could something be required to be able to enter into a contract. Sometimes, under certain circumstances, the contracts are concluded in the interest of the data subject. It can also qualify as a legal basis, but here are further conditions apply.